the biggest fans in most cases of our product and products like ours, I think, are the entry writers themselves, not just the managers, right?
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Hey, folks, we're in for a good show on Simply Trade Podcast. Lalo and I have been doing this now for a little while, and I can't believe we're past the 300 mark by this time. And Lalo, it is humbling, man. I tell you, it's just, I keep seeing it. I know we've made some posts on that. It is just so phenomenal how our listeners have been so supportive, but most of all, it's still a lot of fun to kick around here with you. I love it, bud.
Yeah, thank you. And then to that point, I guess it's crazy to think that we're actually at 300 or 300 plus because we were just talking about this off the air here about how people may recognize who we are. When we're at events, please don't think that somebody at the grocery store here at my city is going to even recognize me. I mean, but anyway, but when we're at events, it's actually cool because they will recognize us by our voice or how we look or whatever, which is really cool. And that's, I guess, the magic of having had 300 shows. I remember that first event we did, Andy, when we first came out and people are like, what are these dudes? What do these guys have all this lights and cameras? Well, they just thought we were a bunch of goofballs. Yeah, microphones everywhere. And obviously, I didn't even know what I was doing at the time either. I just grabbed a bunch of microphones and was wires everywhere and these weird cameras and lights. But yeah, now we're a lot more efficient. So it's actually nice that we've stayed this long. So.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to introduce these two guys. So, Lalo, I mean, you met them, so let me defer to you as far as the introduction here, and we're going to get into a good discussion.
Well, this interested me a lot was because when we were looking at, I love technology, of course. I mean, both my kids are software engineers, and my wife and I came from that, and probably from listening to the show, everybody probably already knows that. But so technology and software are always top of mind for me. And so I always like to look at the niche of what any one new software product might be answering. And I've never seen this one. This one I'm really excited about. And of course, we're not going to necessarily focus a lot on the software, but on the problem or the area that it addresses. So DocUnlock, when I dug in a little bit, I saw that they addressed the process of getting entries written or the entry writer process. So, which is really cool. Digging in a little more, I found that one of the founders, Ned, was part of Flexport and got the entry writing team, let's call it, started there with. I think last I heard was like close to 400 people that he onboarded and got that team going, which is huge task because teaching people how to do entries, it's kind of boring, I guess. Let's say, I guess, I don't know. I mean, you're dealing with all the codes and everything, right, Andy? I mean, it's just like
it's about as fun as watching paint dry on the wall.
So that's how we have here is Jack and Ned. Jack, Ned, welcome to the show. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we didn't insult or downgrade what you guys are doing. But just trying to set the stage here a little bit.
No, excited to be here, guys. And you're absolutely right. The entry writing process can be quite it can be tedious at certain times for sure. But like you were saying, we've been fans of the podcast for a very long time. It's kind of funny. We were talking before we started recording about how you sort of feel like people who have been, talking in your ears for the last couple of years. And now for you guys, which is awesome to watch this podcast grow. There's so few that are focused, specifically on compliance and have any sort of, content to share with the customs brokerage community. And so it's awesome what you guys are doing. And I've learned a ton just listening over the years. So excited to be here. I'm Jack Moberger. I'm the head of sales at DocUnlock. And I'll let Ned, one of our co-founders, introduce himself as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Jack. And before I launch in, we'll just echo what he said. I think now more than ever, I'm glad there is this podcast. I've learned a lot myself over the past crazy few months. But yeah, so my name is Ned. Great to meet all of you. Thanks for having us on. And as you mentioned, and Jack mentioned, I come to industry from Flexport, where I was for the better part of a decade. So I joined pretty early in the journey, 2017. And started, so we were just it was already a few hundred people, but very early, especially in the customs organization. So I joined and started a org called Data Services, which supported the customs org and did exactly what we talked about. So assisting with entry writing. And, Flexport's customs business is like really any other brokerage in that it's all about how many entries you can do in a given month. It's how you get paid, per broker, and how quickly you can turn them around and how accurately you can do them. And so when we started, I think we were less than 100 entries per person per month. We were able to more than triple that over 5 or 6 years of really hard work, and a lot of technology, a lot of process also, and get that accuracy up to close to 100% as well as the on-time performance. So super. By no means am I taking credit for all of that, but as a group, really proud we were able to do there.
Excellent. All right. So as you're looking through and building your processes and all, one of the things I will say is, just so you all know, I've actually managed customs brokerage operations before. And actually, when I was in Canada, I was managing a very large customs brokerage operation along with the import clearance process as well as a carrier, as well as a broker and whatnot. And as you're looking through that, I mean, it's almost like an assembly line in certain things. You have different people that do different things. One is you're going step by step. One person takes it, builds the file, hands it off to a broker, rater, however the job title is. And then they go through and prepare the entry for release and confirm it and do all these other things rated on that. Or the other is an assembly line where people are doing different bits and pieces. You've gone from the days of, excuse me, way back telex machines to then fax machines. Fax was, very big, but then you had these ridiculous fees that people were charging to stand at a fax machine, take a piece of paper, put it in a hard copy file, and the hard copy file gets moved around and all that. And so that now you're in today's world where, things have gone from, PDFs to there's data, or now you've got a combination of both, a hybrid of different things. And you got bits and pieces of information from multiple sources. So it can boggle the mind, but as it's coming through and looking at it, I guess one of the best things to find out from you is you're gathering information through your process and your systems, I guess, from those multiple sources and feeding it to the entry. Is there a way to, what would be the ideal scenario for somebody that's listening to streamline the clearance process?
Andy, some of the complexities that you mentioned, definitely exist. And I would say there's even more than that, because there's been rulings over the last, couple of decades that have also really changed the business of customs quite a bit, starting with remote filing and the ability to do this, sort of anywhere in the world, which also sort of disempowered a lot of the ability to do things physically. But also, rulings on who's allowed to be typing these things in. This isn't just standard data entry work. You can't have some team, in another country who's typing this in at potentially a lower cost. These are all folks that are sort of in the US. But, I think framing this, the process that a lot of the folks that we talk to and really customs brokers in general, the process has started to get easier, through ABI software, through, sort of the ability to start to receive things electronically from some of your, your customers. And a lot of teams will start there, trying to optimize what they can. What can we receive in a way that, is sort of a format that's compliant for customs to just be able to receive directly or to get right into our ABI. But like you said, there's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of those moving parts don't exist until they've started moving, right? That maybe there's a truck waiting at a border somewhere. Maybe there's, a manufacturer we're depending on for certain commercial documents. Maybe there's, communications we need from customs to get things released or accepted. And so a lot of this, I think, can be optimized for to some extent. And I think that's what you'll hear Ned talk about a little bit as he talks about sort of growing the entry writing organization at Flexport. But it also leaves you at this place where, you can streamline things to a certain extent with people and to a certain extent with process. But a lot of folks, they feel as though this work should be, something that can be a little more automated than it has been in the past. It still feels like data entry. There's some non-obvious things you need to do to get that data entered. But I think, what would be really interesting to sort of hear Ned talk about here, is how you set up the team and the sort of communications with customers initially, and then where you start to sort of hit a threshold for performance, a sort of, asymptote up at the top where you can't really break through a certain amount of efficiency until you get there. So, I'm kind of heading off to see if I missed anything.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Jack. And I agree with everything you said. I think so. One line that Bernie Hart, who worked with the Flexport, would always say, is a senior leader in the customs organization, is a good export makes a good import. And meaning, if you have all your data structured to do the export entry from whatever country you're importing from, if that's all clean and feeding that export entry in a seamless way, the import's going to be a lot easier. And to the extent that you can integrate directly with a large customer to pipe this information in XML, JSON, however you're getting it, that's going to save you time on the import process. But at the end of the day, the broker is responsible for dealing with whatever it is that they're getting from the customer. And try as you might, in some cases, it can be really hard to change the way the data is reaching. So you just need to sort of make do. This is the reality that we're all in. Our customers often will have a portion of their business semi-automated, and then the long tail can be a very frustrating experience and involve a lot of data entry. So before we start working with them, there are a number of keys here as you look to scale up and try to get from that low hundreds or maybe single below 100 entries per broker per month up to 200-300 or even higher, as we've been able to do in many cases using technology and in process. What you're looking to do in these cases is a couple of different things. Now, extracting data from the documents is critical, but it's really much more complicated than just digitizing a document. I think one thing that I didn't know until we got deep into this problem is that whole paradigm is a little bit incorrect in that, two clients looking at the exact same PDF might be pulling different pieces of information out of it. So there's not really like a right answer in terms of what's in this thing. That's highly contextual to the client or the importer. And then the other thing is there's all these processes around the extraction of the data where you are looking at this thing, if it's an invoice or packing list or bill of lading, and you kind of can work out who the consignee is going to be, even if it might not even be on the materials. And there's a million other examples I could give you like that. We call these things standard operating procedures. So it's the kind of thing that a broker would write in a sticky note and maybe put next to their monitor that they can kind of keep in their head. They're like, right next to the data extraction process, but slightly different from it. And so the most powerful thing we did around this at Flexport, I think, was we had hundreds of people doing this kind of work all over the world, for US and international customs. And we came up with a way to structure that information, these SOPs, in a consistent way, so that if the person next to me is working on a client and they get sick or go on vacation, I can very quickly ramp up on their process, right? Even though there's some special stuff that they're following, it's documented in a way I can quickly understand. And then eventually, perhaps we'll get into this. This is some of the kinds of things that we've been able to incorporate directly in our sort of processing engine to be able to handle for our clients.
One of the things that when a client is working with a broker, a customs broker relationship, if you will, with the client is more than just your standard, vendor client relationship. It's a much more intimate type of a process generally. And I'm talking about those that are going to have oversight of your account and whatnot, because they need to try and understand, what is it as a customer? What is it you're trying to accomplish? From your perspective, what is it that, all right, I'm an importer. I come to you and say, okay, what is it that you need from me that would be an ideal scenario that would streamline the process? It would be one of those that could ultimately be the lowest cost that for my entries, because I'm giving you what you need. What is it that you're looking for that would be the ideal? That's where I want to start with, because from there, a lot of people, well, I can give you 80% of that, but it's like, where do we go and where are the deficiencies? So what would be the ideal scenario?
Sure. Yeah. So, ultimately you're trying to basically have two different systems communicate. So the importer and their manufacturing facility uses some accounting software, and then we've seen, every one you can imagine, to track the production of the goods and produce, at the end of the day, the commercial documents that are going to feed the entry. And so they're communicating that information in most cases via PDF or Excel or whatever. But if they can provide it directly in a format that your ABI systems, this is going to be where I'll throw the question back at you and say, what ABI system or what ERP system are you using? Where is this data going to go? And what format does it need to be in there? If those two systems can communicate directly, then, that's instant. You're getting all of the data that you need to do the entry already in a structured format. It's more likely to be correct, to not have humans introducing errors by transcribing it, or other software doing that. And so that's great. I think the problem is it's rare. Those integrations are generally expensive, both to implement in the first case and then also to maintain. And as we're seeing now, with all of the changes in so many different areas of global trade, with the new administration, like, we're seeing some of these integrations that had been built 20 years ago breaking down, and we're finding ways to help folks out and to kind of rebuild them, or use the integration that had previously been built, and kind of use AI to read some of that data and populate the new codes that they might need to add, for example.
Well, and that's one thing you just touched on, something is that utilizing AI technology, we're now getting to the point where, it's coming, it's going to be unbelievable at the impacts there, to now we're actually getting into, I think people are over the shock of, AI is going to take my job, to what they're discovering is AI is enhancing the productivity and the capability of the people that are out there. I mean, I can remember, believe it or not, I'm older than dirt here, when the PC was actually introduced. I literally, everybody was running on mainframes. And I remember when some of these early computers were coming in, and the amount of money that, it was like, I think it was like $5,000, and it was, a 56-bit modem or something. And now we're like talking gigabits and stuff and all that. But anyway, the point being, there literally was a article. There's been several, but there was an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about how the PC was literally going to, take away jobs from people and whatnot. And look at where we're at. You can't survive without a computer in today's world. And it only, mushroomed in the capabilities. Well, I think the AI now is, if you look at it that way, yeah, we got to learn new technology, but, it's going to be fantastic. So now, forgive my little ramble there, but with the AI technology, how is that enhancing the entry writing process?
I think one thing to keep in mind, kind of across all inputs, and if you consider, entry writing or any other manual workflow sort of like an input to some greater output, which in this case is a cleared customs entry, but, oil is an input to so many things, right? The cheaper oil gets, the more people use it to do things. And the faster you can process something, the more often you may take the opportunity to actually do that processing. So, we sort of have yet to see the customs brokerage who, takes all of their folks and says, never mind, we're going to use AI to do all of this. We just want to, we're going to stay exactly where we are. We're going to stay stagnant. We're going to take our existing volume. We're going to migrate it over to some computer, and we're going to stop employing people. What we find instead is that if you can take that broker, so, Ned in his Flexport story sort of talks about the fact that you can go from 100 to 200 to 300 to 400 entries per writer per month. But eventually, let's just say, you're in some crazy alternative universe where actually all of your customers are on EDI, which is certainly not a thing that most folks are able to achieve. Usually it's about 40, 50%, and the other 50% say, thank you, but no, we're not changing any process, and you guys can deal with it. And we work with customs brokers, right? We don't work with importers. We work specifically with the folks who are sort of taking all of these crazy cacophonous inputs and turning them into that one output. So what we find is the faster they're able to do that, the more things they're able to do. And until recently, the story used to be, look, that means that the brokerage can grow. It means that you can take on additional volume, go get that client that you've been chasing for a long time, but just, the chicken and egg of, do I need the 3 people before I have the client, or do I get the client and then go get the 3 people and make sure I can handle all this, train them, well caffeinated, make sure they're going to stick around. That decision gets a lot easier when you start to make things more efficient. But I would say more recently, it's just in time for all kinds of other stuff, right? Single line entries have become 3-line entries. You've got goodbye de minimis and, hello, a ton of volume that's going to need to be processed as a result of that. You've got, folks who are shifting, all kinds of parts of their manufacturing chains to other places. Maybe they're nearshoring, maybe they're onshoring, maybe they're changing the way that their value streams work for their own supply chain. There are so many different parts of these businesses that are changing right now. And for most of the brokers that we work with, the question is, how do I even keep up with talking to all of the customers I need to talk to? It's 14 hours a day of calls right now, 0 imports at the end for a lot of these conversations. And, at the end of the day, you still have a business to run. You still have your normal flow that you need to process and make sure all that works. And to the extent that you can get it as automated as possible, you're still not done. Right. So, let's say you've got everybody running on EDI. That's going to give you the 30, 40, 50 things that you're going to get off of these invoices, these bills of lading, these packing lists. And that might be 30, 40% of an entry, right? You still have the cargo release, the manifest information, the header stuff, all of these different fields that live, like Ned said, sort of on sticky notes on people's desks. Hey, when you're dealing with this importer, this matters. When you're, dealing with this shipping company, here's the SCAT code you got to keep in mind. When you're, processing an FDA PGA, you got to go make sure you got that trailer code in the VFT codes. So many different things that they need to remember. And if those folks are getting paid basically for their fingers to go type all of that stuff in, what they're not doing is calling these people, learning what's going on with their businesses, understanding how they're planning to respond to tariffs, and keeping the traffic coordinated. So, what we find is that as this workload, sort of becomes more and more marginal and less value, or less and less time intensive, their time is already fully spoken for, if not sort of over spoken for, by all of the other things that they need to go do to be, strategic partners to the folks that they're working with.
And so with that, you can provide more one-on-one customer service, can you not?
Right. So the part of the work that we're trying to free people from is not what anybody signed up for this job because they like doing, right? It just comes with the territory, or it has to a certain extent over the years. So it's manual, it's high cognitive load, and it takes away both your time and more probably your energy to do the things that you just mentioned, just really connect with the client and, develop like a consultative relationship. So, the biggest fans in most cases of our product and products like ours, I think, are the entry writers themselves, not just the managers, right? They're getting a new lease on life.
When you wake up at 6:00 in the morning to 900 PDF attachments of 33-page scanned invoices with 500 items on them, and everything sort of needs to be grouped and classified and declared in the right census quantities, and you got all this mental math to do. You're very happy not to have to do that because you've already got another 19 invoice emails you need to go and spend time responding to and understand. The other thing that I'll say, Andy, you mentioned sort of like the relationship with the customer. oftentimes one thing that gives a lot of brokers a bad look is that you receive things from your clients and you kind of just have to start working. It's really fast. You've got, like I said, you got a truck. If you're in, Laredo, for example, you got a truck at the border that's waiting to cross. Or how easy that entry is. That guy's still calling you and he's sitting on the side of the road waiting to get across that border. And he's got a lot of things that he needs to wait for, but you are not one of the ones that he's going to be the most patient with, because you're supposed to be the service provider with a some kind of agreement on how quickly things are going to happen. The other thing that I'll say though is that customers make a lot of mistakes, and they don't. We act like all of these things come into our vision with sort of full accuracy, and the invoice is correct, and the bill of lading matches, and all of that's true. And what a lot of folks don't realize about the entry writer job is that sort of on the way in, one of their first things they need to do is make sure that that importer hasn't made a mistake, or the invoice isn't incorrect, or that they've actually itemized all of their line items so they're not paying duties on non-dutiable charges, or, their sort of first thing to do is review what's been set by the customer. And when they don't need to do that anymore, because there's sort of, a system that's looking to the accuracy of those documents as one of the prerequisites for ingesting it in the first place, they're able to respond to that client a lot more quickly. And, God forbid, they're also able to avoid, starting that entry, working for it on it for 45 minutes, and then sort of coming back and realizing, oh no, this invoice doesn't tie. I have, sort of a problem with the actual input document itself. And if you can get back to the customer within a couple of minutes and say, hey, this invoice is incorrect, first of all, it's sort of, how did you do that? Where did you, how did you so quickly determine that my 500 invoice is wrong? And second of all, they feel like they're in much better hands, because they know that, even if they do make a mistake, they're going to sort of be handled properly. And they got one last line of defense, which that broker is often the manual line of defense that runs that on a calculator right next to their computer.
Folks, when you're looking at this, ideally, you'll have information on your paperwork, but it needs to be also labeled appropriately, because that entry writer still, even with the AI technology and automation and all that, the system's going to pick up what it sees. Here's an FDA registration number, as I just mentioned. It'll grab it, plug it in as an FDA registration number. It's like, it may not be the right one. So that's where that entry writer comes into play. And you just said, they have to look at it and review it. The other side of this, what if there's a harmonized tariff number on the paperwork? I've asked importers, how many times have you seen people, and I've asked the clients and the importers, do you trust the harmonized tariff number that's on the paperwork? Oh, no, can't do that. We don't. I said, well, why not? It's on the paperwork. Why can't we use it? We don't trust the paperwork on there. And I said, well, it's your supplier. Yeah, but we don't have any control over the supplier. And I said, well, wait a minute. Your supplier seems to know what to ship, where to ship it, what to put on the paperwork so they can get paid. You've got control. From a compliance, you may just not have inserted yourself into that process, nor exercised your authority in that. But it takes a collaboration with the purchasing and the purchase orders and this and that. So I get it all. So as you're going through, what I'm hearing in this process in today's world, there's a lot of things that systems do that can handle a lot, but it also empowers that entry writer to be able to pick up the phone and talk to their client, developing that relationship and confirming either information or maybe pointing out there's an error, right?
When you're dealing with this maze of paperwork and values and trying to check your own work, it can be really hard if you're doing every last bit of the sort of entering of the data to keep track of this, all keep it straight. And these rules can also change. So it's just a lot of strain on the poor entry writer. This is exactly the kind of pain that exists to try to want to do away with. Again, thank you for those. I think they're exactly the kind of thing that we found didn't get incorporated into the last generation of sort of OCR AI tools that we used at Flexport. And then we went and scoured the earth to find. We just couldn't find anything that was flexible enough to incorporate this kind of thing that a broker would, know how to do instinctively. And it was just not something we could figure out how to program in. With any system that you use or anybody that you hire, the most important thing is knowing you can trust their output of their work, right? So whether it's a completed entry or a presentation or whatever it is, if you're having to go through every last thing that that person has done, you really haven't saved very much time versus doing it yourself, right? And so how can you trust a system like this or a broker? You know, one of the things that you can use in a customs entry is you can compare the values on the bill of lading to the ones that you see on the packing list or the invoice, right? These documents are going to overlap in very specific ways. And if you watch a really experienced broker, that's exactly what they'll do. Is they go through, they're going to check the totals against the line items and the different documents against each other to make sure that the complete entry that they put together is correct. And so this is the other thing that, we really pride ourselves in implementing for our clients. It's these really hyper-specific validations of the extracted data that are specific to each individual importer.
You know, that right there is paramount. I mean, it's validation with the importer. So I love this. It's like, you don't give all the information over to a client if you are a vendor and they just do it and you never check it. The vendor or the broker's got to get with their client and validate it. So I love that. Well, guys, we could keep talking, but we're going to have to wrap this thing up. Any last moment or last, emphasis here of, again, I guess I'd come back. If somebody's wanting to engage as far as a brokerage operation, what would be some of the key things they could look at to say, where's the opportunity to streamline?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we find that people, always want to know about outside of our system. And I'll start with those and then we'll sort of move into the things that, you can create great efficiency with. So the first is, a lot of folks, they want to know, who should I be using for an ABI? And, as the landscape has gotten more and more, fragmented there, I think a lot of people don't know there are thousands of ABIs out there, licensed ABIs at least. There's not necessarily thousands in use.
For those, we've got a lot of listeners that are either rookies or just listening. So ABI means automated broker interface. So it's like you're talking about can I use? It's kind of like an ISP, an internet service provider. It's like, well, I'm using an automated broker interface is what I need. You just said there's multiple ones out there. So if you got an operation, so
what we find is that the thing that brokerages care about most with these ABIs is not necessarily like how pretty it is, how nice the front end is. What they care about is the technical flexibility. And it's really important that you've got one that's capable of doing some of the electronic transmission, either from your customer or with these vendors, to make sure that you're set up to be able to actually, even be in a position to automate things. So you want somebody who's got really nice integration points, maybe someone who's doing a lot of EDI for their clients already, that tends to be the right place. And then the front end is all about, well, what do I need to fix once I've got things automated to the extent that I can? And I think what a lot of brokers don't necessarily always realize is, even if you're getting these electronic transmissions from your customers, they're almost certainly going to be commercial inputs, almost specifically. So you've got your lines, you've got the things coming off of the invoice, you've got the things coming out of the bill of lading, maybe. Those are going to come in and they're going to provide some subset of the information that's required for your entry. Oftentimes, folks don't even think about the rest of the work to complete that entry. So that's going to go be your manifest, your cargo, your header information, but also your PGAs. And this ends up being a huge amount, if not all of the work that is basically done by these teams is going in and editing things after. And, you'll hear 30 seconds to 15 to 20 to 35 minutes on how long it takes to do that, depending on the complexity of the entry. But that is almost always the opportunity space. So, if you look at the last generation of tools that were out there, they were built to scan the documents, grab what they can, maybe, again, 5, 10, 30 fields, and bring those into the system. And then you've got this other part of the entry, which is actually the majority of the entry that's just left undone because it can't be taken directly off of a document and put into, an ABI. What we, find folks get the most benefit from is the ability to take those SOPs, those things that you were talking to. If you're working with this particular, shipping entity, then you need to know this. If you're working with this importer, then the consignee is going to be over here, but you may not be shipping it to that location. You're going to need, certain information that maybe comes, but only comes in the body of the email. You're going to need certain, information that maybe has just been written down somewhere and needs to be referenced like a parts table or a trade party table. So if you've got all of that information and you're having to type most of it in, then it doesn't matter how much EDI you're doing with your clients. You're going to end up taking these things and doing them manually anyway. And where we find the biggest opportunity is for folks is in grasping the rest of that process and sort of taking it to its conclusion and putting the team into more of an audit position where fewer folks can do, a huge amount of output. And then you are given the opportunity to now communicate more thoroughly with clients, do better traffic clerking, which, a lot of folks in customs brokerage, that's part of the job, is just understanding where things are, where they're moving to. There's a ton of email volume going back and forth on that as well, and needs to be handled by someone who has a lot of context on what's going on with those shipments. So for us, I would say, the first bit is making sure that you have, sort of the technology in place to be able to ingest this stuff electronically. And then it's a question of, okay, once I take that all the way to its conclusion, and maybe I get as many of my clients sending me things in an automated way as possible, how do I then take the other 70% of the work and create a system that's capable of doing that in a robust way, not just lifting the same duplicative values off of those documents, where a lot of people, sort of have already gotten some benefit. So hopefully that helps provide at least a couple things.
Listen, guys, I appreciate y'all coming on. It'll be interesting to see as things progress on to get an update from you with the implement of more technology and whatnot. But right now, I'm sure everybody's just going crazy trying to keep the systems up to date. What tariff rate do you put in today? Did it go up? Did it go down? Anyway. All right. With all that, folks, listen, thank you so much for, the support for Simply Trade. Like us, share us, connect with us on LinkedIn, the other medias. We have several shows now, and I will just say all of that is because y'all have been fantastic in support of our show. So with that, hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.